Hi everyone, welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, episode 3. It's finals week here at UT Austin, so I'm staying pretty busy. My schedule is kind of all over the place, but anyways, I hope you all are doing well, staying warm, and getting to spend time with your loved ones. I'm so happy that the holidays are right around the corner. Can't wait to see my family. My boyfriend's birthday is coming up on the 11th, so I'm really excited about that. I'm going to surprise him with the gifts that I just got him. I can't say what they are now, obviously, because he listens to the podcast, hopefully. Just kidding, but I mean, he does, but I'll update y'all in the next one how everything goes. And yeah, that's it for my life update. I'm going to be doing those more often. I know you guys really appreciate that. But today we're going to be talking about the Lawrence Singleton case, which is also known as the Mad Chopper murderer. If you haven't heard of this case, it is on the more gruesome side, I will say. When I first heard about this case, I had plenty of nightmares, as I do with most of the cases that I look into. Just please be advised that there are mentions of rape and violence, and so just keep that in mind before listening to the episode. Lawrence Bernard Singleton was born in Tampa, Florida on July 28, 1927. He was a merchant mariner that drank heavily to the point of becoming violent. We'll be coming back to his life later on, but for now we're going to get into the case. His first victim would be 15-year-old Mary Vincent from Las Vegas. Mary was one of the 7 children her parents had. Her mom was a blackjack dealer and her father was a military man that worked as a mechanic. Her home life wasn't all that well because her parents were strict and currently in the process of a divorce. This made her rebellious and she began skipping school. Her parents began to get angrier with her more often, and it got to the point where she decided to run away with her boyfriend to Sausalito, California. They lived in his car until he was arrested for raping another teenage girl. This left her homeless and she decided to hitchhike to her grandfather's home on September 29, 1978. Her grandfather lived in Corona, California, almost 400 miles away from where she currently was. Before we continue, you're probably wondering why she would hitchhike that far. The simple answer is that hitchhiking was super popular in the 70s. Lots of people didn't own vehicles and needed rides to get to new places for work or to go back home to their families after failed ventures. Luckily, now there are signs and ads against hitchhiking, including this one from the FBI that I'll link below. This image is of a young man holding his arm and thumb upwards at a group of people driving by. The text at the bottom says, and I quote, "To the American motorist, don't pick up trouble. Is he a happy vacationer or an escaping criminal? A pleasant companion or a sex maniac? A friendly traveler or a vicious murderer? In the gamble with hitchhikers, your safety and the lives of your loved ones are at stake. Don't take the risk." It is kind of interesting, however, that even ride shares can be seen as another form of hitchhiking nowadays. While Mary was trying to hitch a ride to her grandfather's house almost 400 miles away, she was met by some other people trying to catch a ride in the same direction when 50-year-old Lawrence Bernard Singleton stopped next to them. He smiled at her and asked where she needed to go, to which she replied, Los Angeles. He told her he'd take her even though he wasn't going in that direction. Red flag number 1. The van he was driving was spacious enough for the other hitchhikers, but he insisted that there was only enough room for her. At the time, despite the other people warning her, she decided to get in the van. She was tired of being homeless and wanted to get to her grandfather's as soon as possible. This decision would change her life forever. While on the road, Lawrence mentioned that he had a daughter close to her age and she felt comfortable enough to fall asleep. Upon waking up, she noticed the road signs and realized that they were going the opposite direction. She vocalized that she needed to go the other direction, and Lawrence agreed to turn around. According to him, he was just, quote, an honest man who made a mistake. Not too long after, he told her that he needed to stop in order to urinate. Both him and Mary got out and stretched their legs. Before getting back in the van, she looked down at her shoes and noticed that her shoelaces weren't tied. Already beginning to feel suspicious, because he was going in the wrong direction, she decided to bend down in order to tie her shoes in case she needed to run. As she bent down to tie her shoes, Lawrence came up from behind her and hit her over the head with a sledgehammer. In and out of consciousness, he began to tie her up. He then violently raped her multiple times and told her if she screamed, he would kill her instantly. He then forced her to drink an alcoholic beverage and drove her to a canyon nearby where the brutal assault would continue. After arriving at the canyon, he dragged her out of the van and laid her on the side of the road. I'm going to include audio from her I Survived episode so you can hear firsthand what she went through.
The whole time I was just telling him, please, just Set me free. Let me go. Set me free. I remember the words. Just set me free. I won't tell. And he kept raping me till the next day. And I was awake the whole time. And I was awake till I saw the sun starting to rise. We're still in the middle of nowhere. And he pulls me out. And I'm completely naked and already bleeding.
Mary pleaded for her life and begged to be let go, but he grew angrier and said, quote, "You want to be free? I'll set you free." And then he suddenly grabbed a hatchet and cut off both of her arms just below the elbow and then said, "Now you're free." Mary was fully conscious and had actually been holding onto his arm just before he swung the hatchet. She would later claim that she didn't understand how if she was holding his arm, she would still fall. She then saw that her arm was completely detached. He then decided to throw her down a 30-foot embankment, hoping that she was dead. Now you would assume that after all of this blood loss and after being thrown as far as she was, that she would be dead. However, she managed to crawl out of the canyon completely naked, falling in and out of consciousness for 3 miles back to Interstate 5. And as she was walking down the freeway completely naked and covered in blood, she asked for help, but the people driving by were too scared to stop. As she claimed, she looked like something out of a horror film. She would later say that if she was put in their situation, she isn't sure if she would stop either, but luckily, the next car that stopped by her decided to help her to a nearby hospital. She was immediately taken into surgery and was given prosthetic arms. Mary would then undergo intensive psychotherapy in order to cope with the horrific trauma that she endured. This was especially hard on Mary because she was a dancer. She was actually a lead dancer when she performed in Vegas, Hawaii, and Australia. But when this occurred, they had to take parts out of her leg just to save her right arm. Mary was able to testify against her attacker, but while in court, Lawrence whispered to her, quote, "I'll finish the job if it takes me the rest of my life." Though Lawrence was found guilty of rape, kidnapping, and attempted murder, he only served 8 years of his 14-year sentencing and was soon released on parole for good behavior. Now you're probably wondering, why was he only sentenced for 14 years? And why was he let out on good behavior? He was only sentenced to 14 years because that was the maximum sentencing allowed at the time in California by law. As for the getting out on good behavior part, I'm just as confused as you are. How could someone so evil be able to roam the streets again, especially after threatening to come back for her? Lawrence continued to argue that he was innocent and that Mary was actually a prostitute. He actually referred to her as a $10 a night whore. He also claimed that he was simply protecting himself because she tried to kill him. He would later go on to take a polygraph test, and interestingly enough, he did pass, which led some people to believe that he was innocent. But there are many problems with this. If you've taken a psychology class or watched any true crime documentary, then you know that polygraphs are not always reliable. In fact, there are multiple psychologists that find polygraphs to be extremely inaccurate. For example, an innocent person could take a polygraph test and still be seen as guilty, and vice versa, simply because of their heart rate. There are also other factors, such as respiration and skin connectivity, so the next time you hear of a polygraph test in any case, be aware that the results may not be truthful. After many protests against Lawrence being released back to the public, the governor at the time, George Deukmejian, decided to place him on the grounds of San Quentin for his quote-unquote own protection. Why would this man need to be protected, you may ask? Your guess is as good as mine. He was living in a small trailer and put under 24-hour protection by the Department of Corrections. This cost us taxpayers $1,300 a day to protect a vicious, vile murderer and rapist. Unfortunately, this isn't the end of the case, because there would be one more victim in the late 90s. Lawrence decided to move to Florida as he was considered persona non grata in California. If you're unaware of the term persona non grata, it simply means that he was not accepted in society, rightfully so. The problem with this, however, is that people in Florida, in particular his new neighbors, were unaware of the crimes that he committed previously. In fact, Lawrence was described by his neighbors as being super friendly and always willing to cook for everyone. Little did they know, he would continue to terrorize another woman. On February 19th, 1997, he brought a woman named Roxanne Hayes to his home. She was a 31-year-old mother of 3 trying to make money for her kids by engaging in sex work. A painter that was returning to Lawrence's home to finish a job was walking up to the door when he noticed a terrifying scene. Just through the front window, he could see Lawrence standing over Roxanne with a boning knife, stabbing her naked body over and over again, viciously. Terrified, he called 911 and described what he saw. There was blood splattered all over the carpeting and sofa that Lawrence's brother had just bought him. When police arrived, Lawrence opened the door, and they could visibly see blood on his hands. Lawrence replied that he had been chopping vegetables and cut himself. But when the officer looked into the home, he saw Roxanne naked and covered in blood on his living room floor. This is truly so hard for me to wrap my head around. This woman was simply trying to make money to be able to feed her kids, and this is what happened to her. It's also so unfortunate that the news emphasized that she was a sex worker when describing what happened to her, as if it was justifiable. Mary flew from California to Tampa in order to appear in court to testify against Lawrence on behalf of Roxanne. She argued that she was terrified for her and her kid's life every day since he's been out of prison, and after hearing about Roxanne's death, she grew more terrified. He was found guilty and sentenced to death on April 14th, 1998. Before we get into Lawrence's childhood, I believe it's also important to mention that just days before he killed Roxanne, he tried to commit suicide by attaching a dryer hose to the exhaust pipe of his van. But after doing so, a young couple noticed him and saved him. If he would have been successful in his attempt to commit suicide, Roxanne would still be here today, and you have to wonder if that couple that saved him lives with that to this day. I'm gonna play an audio of Lawrence describing his childhood, but before I do, he fails to mention that he was a very heavy drinker and he had 2 failed marriages. He also did not have a relationship with his daughter at all because he was often too drunk and angry that she pushed him away.
I had a very happy childhood. I had 2 older sisters and then later 5 younger brothers. In a very happy family. I was raised during the Depression. And fortunately for me, my father had a permanent job with the railroad.
Singleton says he had few problems as a youngster and made honor student grades in school.
As always, we must discuss the mental issues that he had. According to prison psychiatric reports, he was determined to have paranoid and schizoid personality disorder. Paranoid personality disorder is a disorder that causes people to not trust others and become suspicious of their activity. Schizoid personality disorder is a condition that causes people to not interact with others or engage in social activities. These disorders are comorbid with substance abuse because it is easier for them to be with themselves and not have to engage in social activities. He was known for being angry and having outbursts on others. Once again, all of these factors contributed to him committing these heartless acts of violence. He was fully aware of what he was doing and continued to act this way. I personally don't believe that these were his only 2 victims, as there were lots of missing women cases during the rise of hitchhiking. Lawrence Singleton died in a prison hospital on December 28, 2001, from cancer. At the end of the day, he knew that he was guilty, and he continued to try and make it seem like he was innocent and that he was the victim. This whole case is truly heartbreaking for everyone involved. And I remember watching Mary's I Survived episode years ago, and I just remember feeling full body chills whenever she showed her arms, and just imagining what she went through. I couldn't imagine telling the story if I was in her position without breaking down or feeling extremely terrified. It's just so sad. What happened to these 2 women is what you would expect to see in a horror movie. But I'm so happy that Mary was able to move on and have kids and be there for Roxanne and be able to be her voice and just be able to prove that everything that he did was real and it actually happened. Because if she wasn't there, who knows if they ever would have solved her murder, especially during this time when DNA evidence wasn't as it is now. I did link Mary's I Survived episode so that you can watch it. It is free on YouTube, and I believe it has 2 or 3 other women's stories that are also very scary. But aside from that, that is the end of this case. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the support once again. I have been getting so much love on the Instagram, my ratings, and I just really, really appreciate it. So if you enjoy the show, please make sure that you follow it and that you leave a review. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one.